Thanks, Amanda. Hello, everybody. Hi. We're going to go without the room mic, so raise your hand in the back if you can't hear me. It's great to be with you all. We've had a great opportunity to work with the Institute on the Environment, and Paul and John and Tim and others in the organization who have really helped us on our journey towards a more sustainable food system, which is kind of the broad topic that I want to talk to you about today. As Amanda mentioned, I'm going on 19 years at General Mills. I started my work at General Mills on the general management and marketing side and spent 15 years there, and moved over into sustainability 4 years ago for two reasons. One, I have always believed in the power of business to make a difference in society, but secondly, they were looking for somebody who really understood the operations of the business to be able to integrate sustainability much more fully into the way that we do things. If you think about our business, we're not a sustainability company. We don't sell sustainability. And so my mission is to integrate sustainability into the way that we do business every day, so that by the time I retire, this job becomes defunct, quite honestly. It is part and parcel of how we do things. And that's the way that's the only way we're going to get continuous traction against how we look at these challenges. So my thought today is that I'm going to share with you 6 ways of how we think about sustainability in a large consumer food company, and how that's moving us towards greater integration of ideas and strategies in our businesses. And I hope that that will provide for you some fodder for thinking about how those same basic principles can apply to any organization, any company, any governmental organization, any community organization that looks to move towards greater levels of sustainability. So I'll talk to you about how we think about this stuff and then how we integrate it. And it starts with way number 1 is understanding our business model. So if you think about what we do as a company, we take the output of Mother Nature, we transform it in ways that are relevant to consumers' lives today, and we sell it to consumers, right? That's our basic business model. And what that tells us is that if the engine at the front end of this model breaks down, if Mother Nature breaks down, we're in a world of hurt. We don't have a sustainable, in the broadest definition of the word, a sustainable business model. So the mission that we've defined for ourselves is to conserve and protect the resources that we depend on as a business, and by extension, that enables society to be able to be more sustainable. It enables a more sustainable value model. It enables a more sustainable society as a whole. So it starts with, what's our business model? The second then is to look at the global situation, and I love the graphic from Forum for the Future here, so I borrowed theirs. And all of you who are working in the Institute on the Environment are probably very familiar with this basic concept. Those of you who aren't, there's lots of reasons for us to be concerned about the front end of our business model breaking down, Mother Nature breaking down. 2 avenues of concern. One is increasing demand for resources. So an extra 3 billion people on the planet in the next 50 years, most of them being middle-class consumers. And what happens with middle-class consumers when they move from lower income to middle income, one of the very first things they start doing is eating more animal protein. And animal protein is the great accelerator of demand on resources. There's a study out that shows that the pound of boneless beef that you and I are going to barbecue this weekend with our friends or family takes 32 pounds of grain to grow that, right? So it's a huge accelerator. If you move from a grain-based diet to a more animal protein-based diet, you're accelerating your demand on resources. So it's not only just population growth, it's the nature of population, the growth, that's driving incredible demand. The second then is understanding what's going on with the decline in natural resources. And so we know that agriculture, for instance, it uses 40% of the world's land, 70% of the world's fresh water. We're still deforesting about 50,000 square kilometers every year. There's over 50 million tons of food waste in the global food system. And so there are lots and lots of challenges that are contributing to the funnel closing, and we need to be able to keep that funnel open in order to have a sustainable food supply as a globe and for us to continue to operate as an organization. So way number 2 is to think about the global situation that we're operating in. We're about an $18 billion company. That was our 17.7 was our sales last year. We ship about 5 billion kilos of food products every year. So we can start to make a difference in the challenges of the global food system. And we take that very seriously. But it starts with our own operations. So the third way that we think about this is we think about our value chain. Not just our own operations, not just our own production facilities, but we think about our full value chain. How we take product, the output of Mother Nature, we transform it in our own production facilities, we transport it to places of sale, retailing has an impact, and then how consumers use products. And so we think about that full value chain. And when we look at our full value chain and all the products that we sell, if you do the carbon footprint of that, it looks more like this. Almost 2/3 of the value chain of what we produce and sell every year, almost 2/3 of that carbon footprint is up in agriculture, in the raw materials that we use, the ingredients and raw materials. Only about 8% of our carbon footprint is in our actual production facilities, where we cook or bake and package foods. Only about 4% is in transporting it to places of sale. 12% is in retail, mostly in refrigeration for those products that are refrigerated. And about 14% is in consumer use, in consumers storing things in their refrigerator or freezer or in turning on the oven, right? So it gives you a much better picture of, gosh, where should we, if we want to make a difference, if we want to keep that funnel open, where should we be focusing our efforts? And this has really helped us over the last couple of years focus a lot more upstream. The same is even more true of water, right? If you look at our enterprise-wide water footprint, 99% of our water usage is up in our ingredients and raw material. 1% is in the transformation process, and negligible amounts throughout the rest of the value chain. So another reason for us to help us focus strategically where we do the work. One of the challenges that we have is that we're an inch deep and a mile wide. We have a very wide portfolio of products. I tell my counterpart at Coca-Cola that I envy his job because he basically has to worry about water, sugar, plastic, and refrigeration, right? We've had to do a much deeper sort that I'll tell you about in a little bit here. So that's the third way that we think about this. We think about our value chain. The fourth way that we think about it then is we start with the stuff that we have most control of. Arthur Ashe has this great saying, start where you're at, use what you have, do what you can, right? So we started with where we were at and what we could control. And that was in our own operations. And so we have 6 different public goals against our own operations right now. The first is against water usage in our production facilities. We said we're going to reduce the intensity by 20% by 2015. We're a little more than halfway there. Things like when we cook cans of soup, for instance. It's just the same way that your grandmother used to cook jars of fruit when she used to can preserves. You close it, you put it under pressure, you cook it. Same way here. There's a lot of water, steam intensity in that. And what we realized is, gosh, that water is not coming in contact with the food because the cans are sealed. We could recycle that water. Oh, and we discovered, gosh, there's a lot of energy already embedded in that water. Let's save that energy too. So there's been some huge savings there, just as an example of the kinds of things that we're doing. Energy is another one. We said we're going to reduce our energy intensity in our own production facilities by 2015 by 20%. We're halfway there. This is an engineer's dream. It's lots and lots of small things that you have to map, right? It's things like replacing insulation around steam pipes or replacing automatic switches on machinery so that when you're not using it, it automatically shuts off. The third is our greenhouse gas footprint coming out of our production facilities. Same kind of goal, 20% intensity reduction by 2015. We're about halfway there. One of the examples of that is right up the road here in Fridley, where we've got an oat mill. We realize we produce a lot of oat hulls in the milling process. We're using some of those oat hulls now to generate steam for the plant. It generates 90% of the steam for the plant. We burn those, and then we take the ash from the leftover oat hulls and we provide it to local farmers, because all the great nutrients, soil nutrients, are still in that ash. We've said, down the lower left-hand corner, we said we'd reduced waste coming out of our plants by 50% by 2015. We're well on that way, 42%. Lots and lots of examples here, because this is probably the most direct correlation that an employee at the floor level can see of helping to save money. Transportation, we started working with our transportation providers. We said we'd reduce the fuel intensity of our transportation by 35% by 2015. And we're making great progress there. Today we've reduced that by about 24% through things like better routing, smarter loading, working with our suppliers to use better engines, better trucks, et cetera, as they upgrade. And then lastly is our packaging. And so again, within our own system, we've said we're going to improve the sustainability of our packaging. We're going to address the sustainability of 60% of our packaging by 2015. We've improved 52% of it already. Things like reducing the amount of material that we're using, or increasing the recycled content in our packaging, or increasing the compostability, or even reconfiguring the packaging so we can get more packages on a truck. And we've made great progress there. About 50% of for instance, the packaging fiber that we use comes from recycled content right now. So that was way number 4. Start with our own operations, right? Way number 5 then is to look at the global strategies that are in play. And here I have to give great credit to the team here that worked with other folks and published a terrific article. It's probably going on 2 years ago now, kind of the 5 global strategies to sustainable food security. I'm looking at Paul here. Is that when that came out? I boil it down for our organization into 3, because we can't think in 5s. We can only think in 3. Everything is 3 things. So that's not an academic organization. We're a business. We operate in 3s. And so here are the 3, right? One is to freeze the footprint of agriculture. The second is, I call it sustainable intensification. And here I lump together kind of 3 of the strategies that were in John's article. But it's, how do we get more out of what we have already? How do we get more out with less input? And we'll talk about that. And then thirdly, how do we get rid of the incredible waste in the food system? UN's FAO published another report yesterday. 1/3 of the world's calories are wasted every year. And they're at different places, and so we'll talk about that. So way number 5 is to look at global strategies and start to think about how you embed those into your business operations. So here is a little bit about that first strategy, freezing the footprint of agriculture. For us, that largely means getting rid of any potential deforestation in our value chain. So when you look at global commodities, worldwide global food commodities, the 4 that are of concern are palm oil, packaging fiber, so wood products, correct? Soy, and beef, and those last 2 are largely in Latin America. So as we've looked at this, we've got a commitment on the first one, and I'll talk more about these in detail as I get further into it. But this is global strategy number 1. How do we start to make sure that we're not contributing to the spread of that we're contributing to freezing the footprint? Second then is this whole area of sustainable intensification. How can you get more out of less? How do you intensify where you're at right now? One of the really beneficial partnerships that we've had for going on 6 years now is an initiative called Field to Market. It's initially was run by the Keystone organization. It's now been spun off as a separate 501c3. It has everybody in the value chain and all the helpers along the way. So it's got the seed companies. It's got the input companies, the fertilizer and insecticide and herbicide companies. It's got the grower organizations, the corn growers, the soybean growers, the wheat growers, the cotton growers. It's got the processors like Cargill or ADM or Bunge. It's got folks like us. Kellogg's involved, Unilever is involved. It has retailers, Walmart, for instance, is involved. And then helping us out, it's got academics who are really close to this area. It's got NGOs, World Wildlife Fund, Nature Conservancy, Conservation International are all at the table. And it's got USDA, NRCS is at the table. And the focus of this particular initiative is how do we move large commodity agriculture in the United States towards a more sustainable future. And what we've done is we've defined 6 key metrics initially. We're looking at adding a couple more, but 6 initially. We developed a field print calculator, and we're starting to use that with farmers. So what you see up here is an example of and actual results from work that we've been doing out in Idaho with wheat farmers for the last 3 years. As we've done this work, come to discover, they also, because they're really smart farmers, they rotate every field every year. So they also tend to grow potatoes or sugar beets or barley for Miller Coors, for instance. And we've gotten them to measure their inputs and outputs every year and to start to look at the impacts of those and then to start to make progress. And over the course of those 3 years, you can see the results. Out of those 7 metrics, when you include yield, improvements in all of them except for GHG, right? So improvements in yield, and sorry for the typo, yield's up there twice. One of those should be water. Improvements in yield, improvements in land use, improvements in soil conservation, improvements in soil carbon, improvements in energy use, reductions actually went slightly the wrong way in GHG, and improvements in water efficiency. What it does is it gives a more granular level, and what we're doing is we're helping these very smart entrepreneurs understand the very specific relationship between these kinds of environmental metrics and their own yield and profitability, because that's their major motivator, right? And when you could start to see that connection, then they start looking at what are the tools that we can use to help move us towards a more sustainable future. So the precision agriculture tools are great tools here. Variable rate irrigation, variable rate application of inputs, how closely you grow and you sow the seed. So they continue to look at that. This is work that we've done in Idaho. We intend to roll this out on other large commodity crops as we move forward. Way number 6 then is really how do we start integrating global strategies into our future. And one of the things that we did, as I mentioned before, we're an inch deep and a mile wide. One of the things that we did 2 years ago was we engaged WWF and Rainforest Alliance, and we sat down with them and we went through all of our raw materials, all of our ingredients and raw materials, specifically from their source of origin, and we said, please help us prioritize. And we chose 10 where we can make the biggest difference. 10 important raw materials where we can start to focus. And these represent over half of our raw material buy, so they're very, very important to us, and they're also important in the sustainability landscape. So let me just very briefly walk you through these. In your upper left, palm oil, obviously a big deal in terms of deforestation. Right next to it is packaging fiber, can also be implicated in deforestation. On palm oil, we've got a commitment to be fully certified by 2015. We're 50% of the way there. We fully expect to be there by 2015, working with our SPO on that. On packaging fiber, we're in really good shape. We know 99% of our packaging fiber either comes from recycled sources or comes from certified sources already. A couple of places where we don't have really good line of sight, in Asia, we're using Rainforest Alliance and mapping all the way back to origin to understand if there's any deforestation going on. So either certification or verification. The next three, oats, wheat, and corn, are all using that field to market approach. So we've got wheat going in Idaho. We just had meetings last week with oat farmers in Canada. We're just in the process of internalizing some of the corn milling, and once we get that up and running, we'll start that process. So that will enable us to move some of those large commodity, U.S. commodity agriculture ingredients to a more sustainable future. As a company, we source about 70% of what we buy out of the United States. So even though we're a global company, we still buy about 70% of what we sell here in the United States. It actually happens to match our revenue. We sell about 70% of what we sell here still in the United States. So right here in your hometown. Dairy is number 6. Lots of concern around the environmental impact of dairy, all the embedded impacts in what we feed those animals, and then the animals themselves, right? All the methane that's produced, the water quality management and water usage. So here we're just in the process of kicking off work with one of our dairy cooperatives here in the United States to use a very similar framework as field to market, developed by the Dairy Innovation Center and WWF, to start measuring the environmental metrics on farms and working with farmers to help drive down those environmental metrics and tying it to their production efficiency, so that we can embed that kind of sustainability thinking. Next, you've got sugarcane, obviously concerns about harvest practices, and also concerns about the economic livelihoods of smallholder farmers, and particularly if at some points in time whether children can get inappropriately pulled into the agricultural supply chain there. And so we're part of Bonsucro. We've just started that work in Latin America. Sugar beets is the next one. Sugar beets, very similar kinds of concerns as the row crops, except an even greater concern around soil conservation, right? Because it's a root crop, so you're churning the earth much more heavily every year. And so we're about to kick off a pilot there, right here in Minnesota, up in the Red River Valley, right, with using that field to market framework. The last two are cocoa and vanilla. This is what cocoa looks like before they split open the big pod, right, and take out the little seeds. These are crops that are in Africa. 70% of the world's cocoa comes from 2 countries in West Africa. 90% of the world's vanilla comes from Madagascar. As we think about this and the sustainability of our value chain, this is really, really critical to us. And actually, Paul's team helped us really kind of understand cocoa as one of the real concerns when we look ahead to future climate change, because you've got such a consolidated geographical supply, and that's one of the regions of the world that's going to be particularly hard hit. We're very concerned about cocoa, as is anybody who is a large buyer of cocoa. The real concerns here are much more social and economic. So lots of smallholder farmers. All the world's vanilla, or 90% of the world's vanilla, comes from about 60,000 farmers in the northwest coast of Madagascar. And so the economic viability of those farmers is critical in order to make sure that we can continue to get vanilla. And at the same time, at times, because of that economic stress that they're under, children get pulled inappropriately into the agricultural supply chain. And the issues there that in vanilla largely crop up is that kids miss school. They're not particularly having to carry heavy loads or deal with chemicals or dangerous implements. Vanilla is really an interesting crop. It's an orchid, right? It's essentially an orchid. Does not like to be domesticated at all. Loves to grow under the forest canopy. So the growth of vanilla is not in any way contributing to deforestation because it likes that canopy. But there are no natural pollinators for vanilla. So vanilla has to be hand pollinated. In November, all over northeastern Madagascar, all these smallholder farmers are out there with these tiny picks about the size of a Q-tip going flower to flower to flower to flower. The flowers are open for about 3 hours every morning, one morning in their lifetime, right? So they got to get out and catch them while they're open. So it's very labor intensive work. What we're doing there is we've partnered with CARE. We're actually helping these farmers integrate forward in the value chain, to use a business term, right? What they typically do is they grow the vanilla and then they sell the green beans to a collector, a trader, who then sells it to a processor. We're helping them go the next step and start to cure the vanilla beans so that they become brown like that. After they've been cured, that's what they look like. And it's more of an art form than it is a science, but there's a little bit of work to it. And so we're providing them with the equipment to be able to do that. We're providing them with storage to be able to do that, and training as well. And then we're working with our suppliers to buy that directly for them and pay a higher price because they're doing some of the value-added work for the supplier and improving their livelihoods. Cocoa, the concern there is not only what will happen with climate change, but the viability of those smallholder farmers. Many of those farmers are aging. The average cocoa farmer is well into their 50s. That's a pretty high average age. Urbanization is hitting West Africa. Lots of kids don't want to stay on the farm. They're moving to the urban cities. A lot of these trees are old. And so how do we improve the economic viability of cocoa for those farmers so that we continue to get a good crop? Here we're working with our suppliers and with CARE to provide them with training and the villages with the right sort of livelihood support to make sure they've got good health care, good education. Here's one where we are concerned about children sometimes being inappropriately pulled into the agricultural workforce. Here you've got machetes involved sometimes, you've got chemicals sometimes involved. Sacks of cocoa can get kind of heavy. And so there's even greater concerns around children in the workforce here. So working with CARE to develop programs at the village level to make sure that that doesn't happen and you've got a sustainable source of cocoa. Lastly then, food waste, right? The third of the big global strategies. So the UN says we waste a third of the calories we produce as a global food system every year. And it hits all of the pillars of sustainability. It is an environmental tragedy because we're churning a third of the agricultural environment every year and then throwing it away. I mean, just if we could get rid of this, just think of how much of an impact that would have, right? Given the metrics I talked about before. It's a social tragedy. 1 in 8 people around the world are going hungry today. We could be putting that food to better use. And it's an economic tragedy. When I talk about this to peers in the industry, not only do those two things appeal to them, but we're all paying for this. We're paying for 33% waste in the system. If you designed a system, if you're an engineer and you designed a system, you'd never build in 33% waste into the system. You might build in 0.5% of flexibility, but 33%, that's crazy. The challenge, right, is that it's a very fragmented system. There are 7 billion plus players in the global food system. You've got 1 billion plus farmers, lots of people in the provision side of the sector, but every consumer is part of it as well. If you look at developing markets, the big areas of loss tend to be focused more between the farm and the entry point to the market. Lots of post-harvest loss. If you look at developed economies, more of it tends to be focused post-consumer. And so what can we do to help drive this down? Well, within our own operations, obviously, that's a clear point of focus. But we're co-chair of what's called the Food Waste Reduction Alliance, which is a partnership between the Grocery Manufacturers Association, the National Restaurant Association, and the Food Marketing Institute, which is basically the U.S. association of all the food retailers, the grocery stores, to look at ways that we can drive this down in the United States. You may be familiar with the EPA's food waste hierarchy. It's a great tool. Tells you all the better ways to use food than sending it to landfill where it turns into methane. And so we're looking at ways that we can do that. One of the things that we did was we first of all got our hands around where is the problem, right? So the problem tends to be either post-consumer or in institutions and restaurants, and even a large part of that is post-consumer in the United States. So we're looking at best practices that that we can provide to institutions. We're developing and sharing those best practices so that every organization can start to drive it down within their own. And then we're also looking at technologies, and we're looking at policies that we can promote. One of the really interesting meetings we had was with a food waste broker. Who ever thought there would be an industry in food waste brokering? But there now is. And I've been surprised. I've now been contacted by probably a half a dozen over the last 2 years. It's people who are making a living saying, I will take your food waste and find a better use for it, as long as you give me a cut of whatever that value is. So sending it to food banks, turning it into compost, turning it into energy, lots better ways than sending it to landfill. Obviously, the ultimate goal is to get it into the mouths of consumers. So one small story here, we recognize that we can see beyond our own four walls. One of the people on our team last year said, hey, I've worked on the Green Giant vegetable business in the past. Did you know that sometimes Mother Nature gets ahead of us and it creates a lot of waste, a lot of food waste? Well, go figure it out. The challenge is when Mother Nature helps us produce corn, oftentimes there's more corn than we can package in any given moment. And we've got to package it. We always package our corn within 48 hours, right, to maintain the quality of the corn. Sometimes at harvest, there's more corn than we can package all at one time. So we contacted a local packager, Seneca Foods, in southern Minnesota. They were responsible for getting the harvest out of the fields and bringing it to a site. Cargill provided the site where they could bring, close to the farms, where they could bring all of that sweet corn that was fresh. Super Value provided 2 trucks, and we then partnered with Hunger Free Minnesota. 800,000 pounds of sweet corn went to 10 states and provided 450,000 meals to hungry people within 48 hours, right? They were able to get it out that quickly. Just a small example of when people start to look at this, they can start to address some of the challenge, and that's available in the supply chain. So that's really the extent of the comments that I had. I wanted to just share with you 6 ways that we're trying to move towards a more sustainable food supply. Understanding our business model, understanding the global challenges, looking at the global strategies, and then how we start to integrate those strategies into our business. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions or discuss anything. Thanks.